Hello, welcome, and thank you so much for attending for today's talk, last talk of the day. My name is Ana Jiménez. I'm currently the OSPO Program Manager at TODO Group. We are an open source project and group of open source program office practitioners that works together to work on best practices, training, tooling, to work on OSPO adoption worldwide. So as I was saying, formerly I'd work at Arbiteria. It's a Spanish firm focused on software development analytics. I spent there 3 years helping organizations in their inner source and open source metrics journey. And I always said that I'm a hybrid because I can speak both languages. The business language because of my bachelor's degree, initial bachelor's degree in marketing, and then the developers language since I also did a master's degree in data science, where I get more into Python programming and data analysis and data engineering. So what I'm trying to share with you today is how can we see open source through the lens of an open source program office, and why adopting a strategic posture around open source is no longer optional. So for this, I have 2 questions for you. One is more from the open source sustainability side, and the other is more for a business perspective. So what will you say if I ask, what are the potential risks of the open source ecosystem in organizations if organizations do open source incorrectly? And what is the cost of doing business for organizations if they do open source incorrectly? 10 years ago, you might say, oh, well, there is not really risk at all, right? But nowadays, these 2 questions are pretty important when getting and thinking about open source. These are some of the latest reports from different organizations. This comes from Sonatype from last year, that discovered that 90% of modern applications code base is open source. And not only that, other studies, such as the one coming from Red Hat or Synopsys, states that 90% of IT leaders are using enterprise open source today, and 91% of commercial applications contain outdated open source components. So nowadays, we're saying that open source is everywhere. It's not that organizations are now are becoming more software-driven organizations. It's that if you are doing software, if your organization is dealing with software, you're also getting engaged into open source. And it's not just about using open source, it's about contributing back, giving back to the community. So how does OSPOs take place in this sphere? I would like to that you think about one role that had a lot of impact during the past years in security, that were the Chief Information Security Officers. For those that are unfamiliar with these roles, those are roles that are responsible of maintaining and establishing all the processes, policies, and strategy to ensure all the information assets within the organization are protected. So this idea can be analogous to what an open source program office is. The description of an OSPO is that they are the center of competency of an organization, open source operations and structure. In other words, it's putting efforts into open source, is taking care of open source within the organizations, and working on policies, processes, and strategy, and stop doing open source ad hoc or accidental open source. And I will now explain what is this in a few slides. And when getting more deep dive into the OSPO, we can see that they are multidisciplinary. Like, they have so many responsibilities because open source is an ecosystem. It's huge. So these are all the different tasks and responsibilities that an OSPO might be taking. Small OSPOs might be only focusing on some specific topics, others in more of them. When taking a deeper look on these responsibilities, there's always questions. The main questions can be grouped into these 3 areas. So the first one that many people ask when thinking about OSPOs is, does an OSPO fit for my organization? Because, OSPOs has been there a decade old nowadays, but it has evolved a lot. It started, for instance, in the States, it started as in large organizations, software organizations. Also in Europe, we have seen some efforts, but didn't had a lot of attention. So let's break out this a bit. The main issue and advantage is that OSPOs can take many flavors, and there is no board template to build OSPOs. But despite of that, we are seeing that this year and the previous years, organizations, and not only from the corporate side, but also for public sector and universities, are creating these strategic places where open source is nurtured. So for instance, the World Health Organization published their OSPO. We are seeing also OSPOs in the banking and finance sectors, for instance, Goldman Sachs, Porsche from the automotive industry, or even the European Commission. And there is more out there. This comes from the OSPO landscape, one of the many initiatives we have at the TODO group, that you can take a look of how is the OSPO ecosystem evolving. But even though all these OSPOs are starting to being formed, there are OSPOs that you see that they are growing, that they are being nurtured, that they are doing the right way. And then you see other OSPOs that they just stuck. They doesn't have any decision or low decision power in the organization, and either they parasite or are just maintained. They are just a siloed team in the organizations because someone said that, yeah, let's have this. So how can we move from this OSPO, this locked OSPO, and transform it into a growing OSPO, in an OSPO that has decision power, that grows, and that evolves? I just wanted to point out one case study that comes from Spain. I'm based and raised in Madrid, in Spain. These are called the Oficinas de Software Libre. So these are open source offices that act like an OSPO. They were created, some of them were created a decade, they 10 years ago or so. And they are so many, but they're just there. Many of them, some of them has perished, they are no longer maintained, and others are there, but they don't have really decision-making power in the university at all. They are just like as a side project and like just having a bunch of initiatives there. So I just wanted to point out this example. There might be many reasons of why is this happening, but one important topic is that make sure when building the OSPO that these OSPOs are nurtured from multiple angles. So either where the need came from, because come from the top-level management that they said we need a strategy, or they can come for the first-line professionals, a developer that says, hey, or the IT team in a company that says, hey, we are using open source, but we are not taking care of that. We should be doing something. Make sure that it doesn't get only there. It's a strategy. It should be aligned with the organization's goals, and build this matrix of experts around teams. So that might help to move from the locked OSPO to the growing OSPO. And when doing it right, they can have many benefits. I have short time, so I'm just going to go through the slides. The next question is, when is the best time to start an OSPO? And the short answer will be, when you're starting into open source, there's a lot of questions on the value of open source. And then you realize that your organization is doing open source. There are no coordinated efforts. If you are in that side, this is a more mature open source development. So just stay there. There are plenty of communities that can help you in this journey. And once you realize that you need a strategy and policies to help you with your open source operations, then might be the right time to start an OSPO to accelerate this open source adoption and act as an open source catalyzer or vehicle. We also have certain characteristics that you can read through and see if your organization is ready or not to start the OSPO. And finally, the last question, and most important one, in my honest opinion, is, OK, I know I need an OSPO. I know it fits for my organization. How can I start? How can I pave the path to build an OSPO? Coming back to all the responsibilities that an OSPO can take. Once you decide which one to choose, it can be kind of chaotic where to start. So for this reason, another TODO group initiative was the 5-stage OSPO model that can help some organizations to use this as a framework and as a roadmap to go layer by layer, advancing in their OSPO. I also have to say that since there is no board template to build an OSPO, this path, this model, has been proved to work well under traditional environments. But you can always adapt it and find your way and find your model. So in a nutshell, there is the initial stage that is no OSPO, that is ad hoc open source, and then we have 4 stages. The first one will be the legal-driven stage. In this stage, the organizations must identify all the legal and security risk, and they must implement risk mitigation strategy. So this means careful licensing, open source compliance, developer educations, and in terms of security and legal issues, and inventory taking, all software bill of materials and automations processes if needed. And these are some of the resources in terms of training, playbooks, toolings that are out there, open source, and provided by thousands of, but a lot of open source communities. That you might be able to explore. I will be uploading these slides on my LinkedIn in case you're interested. The second part will be the community-driven states. Once you have the legal states in place, it's when you can amplify the message of open source usage and building internal ambassadors. In this case, inner source commons can be a good place to be at and to explore their resources. Once you have this internal communication going and this and you have adopted inner source practices to help with this communication, you can go to the community-driven states part 2. And in this stage, you can, the organizations can incentivize developers to work on open source projects that are critical to their operation. So in here is when outbound open source might be happening and how to contribute to open source projects and building all these policies and playbooks related with this. And then, once this is covered, the organizations can move, the OSPO can move to engagement-driven states. So in this step, organizations are ready to incubate and launch their own projects and release them as open source into the public sphere. And finally, the leadership-driven states, where the OSPO act more as the open source advisor of the organizations and provides technology leadership and understand and help organizations understand and navigate project governance. And here are some of the resources that you might find useful. So to end up with, I would like just to remark 3 important topics when starting in the OSPO. First of all, have clear goals and make sure those goals are aligned with the organization's goals. If not, you will only be working in silos, and it's very likely that your OSPO won't succeed in the organization. Second, find your way. There is a lot of information and resources around OSPOs, around other OSPOers that started the journey a long time ago, and they have provided a lot of resources and best practices. You just need to take what it's useful for your organization and adapt it to your needs. And finally, collaborate. Collaboration is key. Networking is key. There is a lot of networking spaces in the open source communities, in open source projects, and foundations that can help you to find your way and get this roadmap. And that's all. As I said, you can find me on LinkedIn and also on Twitter, where I will be sharing these slides and all these resources. And thank you so much, and thank you so much all the organizers for Open Source Lisbon for making possible this great conference. Thank you.